dust devils danced across the parched Arizona territory, mirroring the turmoil in Evelyn May Thornton's tear-filled eyes. The crack of gunfire still echoed in her ears, a grim reminder of the brutal attack that left her homestead ravaged and her husband Thomas lifeless. Cornered and desperate with the scent of smoke and fear thick in the air, she could only whisper two words that might be her salvation, a plea carried on the wind to a figure as legendary as the desert itself. "Help me." Little did she know her whispered plea would reach the ears of Chaitton, an Apache warrior haunted by his own ghosts, and set in motion a confrontation with a ruthless gang known only as the Sons of the Devil, led by the cold-blooded Jasper Thorne. The stage was set for a showdown where survival meant facing down not just men, but the very embodiment of cruelty in the untamed West. The relentless Arizona sun beat down on the scorched earth, each ray a hammer blow against Evelyn May Thornton's already fractured spirit. Her small ranch, nestled in a shallow draw near the San Pedro River, was now a smouldering ruin. The acrid smell of burnt wood and spilled coffee hung heavy in the air, a stark testament to the brutal efficiency of the men who had descended upon her life like vultures. Thomas, her gentle giant of a husband, lay still and silent near the collapsed porch, a crimson stain blooming on his worn denim shirt. Evelyn's throat was raw, her voice reduced to a hoarse whisper from the screams that had torn through the morning's tranquility. She had hidden beneath the floorboards of their root cellar, the sounds of destruction and callous laughter seeping through the cracks in the earth above her. When the sounds finally faded, replaced by an eerie silence, she had dared to emerge, only to be met with the horrific tableau. Tears streamed down her dusty cheeks, each drop carving a clean path through the grime. She was alone, utterly alone, in a land that offered little mercy. The nearest town, Tombstone, was a day's hard ride away, a journey she couldn't fathom undertaking in her current state, not with the lingering fear that the attackers might still be lurking. Clutching the locket Thomas had given her on their wedding day, its silver surface scratched but still gleaming faintly, Evelyn sank to her knees beside his body. A sob racked her frame, shaking her thin shoulders. It was then, amidst the crushing grief and terror, that the faintest of hopes flickered within her. She had heard tales, whispers, carried on the wind like the dust devils that swirled across the plains. Tales of Chaitton the Shadow Walker, an Apache warrior of fierce reputation and unwavering resolve, who roamed these lands, a protector of the innocent, a terror to the wicked. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but Evelyn had nowhere else to turn. Lifting her tear-streaked face to the vast, indifferent sky, she whispered his name, a fragile plea carried on the hot desert breeze. "Chaitton, please, help me." The words were barely audible, lost in the immensity of the landscape, yet in her heart Evelyn clung to the belief that somehow, somewhere, they would be heard. Unbeknownst to her, miles away in the rugged Dragoon Mountains, Chaitton sat in silent contemplation, the setting sun painting the western sky in hues of blood orange and deep violet. He was a man etched by the harsh realities of the frontier, his face a canvas of weathered skin and sharp, intelligent eyes that missed little. He was a warrior of the Chiricahua Apache, a tribe fiercely independent and deeply connected to the spirit of the land. He had seen his share of cruelty and injustice, and though he often chose solitude, he could not turn a deaf ear to the cries of the truly desperate. As the wind rustled through the pinon pines, carrying with it the faint scent of smoke from the east, a subtle shift occurred within him. It was not a sound he heard, not precisely, but a feeling, a disturbance in the delicate balance of the desert, a ripple of pain that resonated deep within his soul. He rose silently, his movements fluid and graceful, despite his imposing frame. His hand instinctively went to the worn leather grip of his rifle, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon where the smoke lingered like a dark omen. Something was amiss, and Chaitton knew with a certainty that ran in his blood that a shadow had fallen upon the land. Chaitton moved with the stealth of a mountain lion, his senses honed by years of living in harmony with the unforgiving terrain. He followed the faint scent of smoke and the almost imperceptible tracks that marred the sun-baked earth. He saw the broken branches of desert scrub the overturned stones, the subtle signs that spoke of hurried passage and violence. These were not the tracks of ordinary travelers. They were the heavy, uneven prints of shod horses, many of them, and the deeper scuffs that suggested a heavy load or perhaps a struggle. As he drew closer to the ravaged homestead, the full extent of the tragedy became starkly apparent. The sight of the burnt-out buildings, the scattered belongings, and the still form lying near the porch confirmed his grim suspicions. He approached cautiously, his eyes scanning the surroundings for any lingering threat. The air was thick with the smell of death, a smell Chaitton knew too well. He knelt beside the fallen man, his gaze somber. Thomas Thornton. Chaitton recognized the name. Thornton was a man who had always treated the Apache with respect, trading fairly, and never resorting to the prejudice that was so common among the white settlers. This act of violence felt personal, a violation of the fragile peace that sometimes existed between their worlds. Chaitton examined the tracks around the body, his brow furrowed in concentration. There were the boot prints of several men, their heels digging deep into the soft earth, indicating they were likely wearing heavy riding boots. The pattern suggested a disorganized retreat, as if they had left in a hurry, but not before ensuring their deadly work was done. His gaze then fell upon the smaller set of footprints leading away from the house towards the root cellar. They were the tracks of a woman, small and light, moving with a desperate urgency. They ended abruptly near the collapsed wooden door, suggesting she had sought refuge within. Chaitton followed the faint disturbance in the earth around the cellar, noting the signs of someone having emerged, their movements hesitant and filled with grief. He found Evelyn a short distance from her husband, huddled on the ground, her face buried in her hands. He approached slowly, his presence announced only by the soft crunch of his moccasins on the loose gravel. He knelt beside her, offering a silent presence. He knew that words were often inadequate in the face of such profound loss. Evelyn flinched at the sound, her head snapping up, her eyes wide with fear and suspicion. She saw a tall, imposing figure, his face partially obscured by the shadows of his wide-brimmed hat. The sight of his dark skin and long braided hair only heightened her terror. Who are you?" she stammered, her voice trembling. Chaitton spoke softly, his English clear, but carrying the melodic cadence of his native tongue. "I am Chaitton. I heard your whisper on the wind." Evelyn stared at him, her fear slowly giving way to a flicker of disbelief. Could this be the legendary Apache warrior she had so desperately called out to? He didn't look like the savage she had been warned about in the fearful whispers of other settlers. His eyes held a deep sorrow, a quiet understanding that transcended the color of their skin or the differences in their cultures. You heard me?" she asked, her voice still weak. Chaitton nodded. "Tell me what happened here, Evelyn Thornton." And so, in broken sentences, punctuated by sobs, Evelyn recounted the horrific events of the morning. She described the sudden arrival of the riders, the viciousness of their attack, the cold-blooded murder of her husband, and her desperate flight to the root cellar. She didn't know who they were, only that they were ruthless and cruel, their faces masked by bandanas, their voices gruff and unfamiliar. As she spoke, Chaitton listened intently, his gaze unwavering. He absorbed every detail, every nuance of her story. When she finally fell silent, exhausted, and emotionally drained, he nodded slowly. "They will be held accountable," he said, his voice low and firm. "Tell me everything you remember about them. Any detail, no matter how small, might be important." Evelyn, drawing strength from his quiet resolve, recounted every detail she could recall. The way one of them had a silver ring on his left hand, the distinctive limp of another, the harsh, guttural sound of one man's laughter. Chaitton listened patiently, his mind piecing together the fragments of information. When she was finished, he rose to his feet. "Stay here. I will track them." Fear flickered in Evelyn's eyes. "Don't leave me alone. They might come back." "I will not be gone long," Chaitton reassured her. "But I must follow their trail quickly before it grows cold." He surveyed the ravaged homestead. "Gather what supplies you can salvage. Water, food, blankets. Be ready to move when I return." With a final reassuring glance, Chaitton turned and disappeared into the vast expanse of the desert, a lone figure silhouetted against the unforgiving landscape, his purpose clear, his resolve unshakable. The hunt had begun. Chaitton followed the tracks westward, his knowledge of the land allowing him to read the subtle signs left by the riders. They were heading towards the Black Mesa, a rugged and desolate region, known to be a haven for outlaws and those seeking to evade the reach of the law. The size of the group, at least 6 or 7 men, and the speed of their travel suggested they were confident and well-mounted. As he rode, Chaitton's mind turned to the nature of the attack. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It was deliberate, brutal. The thoroughness of the destruction, the focused violence directed at Thomas Thornton, spoke of something more than simple greed. There was a coldness to it, a malevolence that chilled even Chaitton's hardened spirit. He found their first campsite near a dry creek bed. The remnants of a hastily extinguished fire, discarded food wrappers, and the distinctive mark of a horseshoe, a crude, uneven forging, offered further clues. Among the debris, Chaitton discovered something that made his blood run cold, a small hand-carved wooden token shaped like a coiled rattlesnake with 2 small obsidian beads for eyes. He recognized the symbol. It was the calling card of a notorious outlaw gang known as the Sons of the Devil. Jasper Thorne, their leader, was a man whispered about in hushed tones across the territory. He was known for his ruthlessness, his penchant for extreme violence, and his almost supernatural ability to evade capture. The Sons of the Devil left a trail of terror wherever they went, their motives often shrouded in secrecy, their actions characterized by an almost ritualistic cruelty. Chaitton had encountered their handiwork before the aftermath of their raids, marked by unnecessary bloodshed and a chilling disregard for human life. The fact that they were involved in the attack on the Thornton homestead elevated the situation to a far more dangerous level. This was not just about avenging a wrong. It was about confronting a force of pure evil that threatened the very fabric of the frontier. He knew that confronting the Sons of the Devil would be a perilous undertaking. They were well-armed, fiercely loyal to Thorne, and utterly without conscience. But the image of Evelyn's tear-streaked face, the memory of Thomas Thornton's peaceful demeanor, fueled his resolve. He would not allow these predators to roam free to inflict more pain and suffering on innocent lives. Mounting his sturdy Appaloosa Ghostwalker, Chaitton urged him onward, following the increasingly clear trail towards the Black Mesa. The landscape grew more rugged, the shadows longer, as the sun began its descent. He knew that the Sons of the Devil were likely seeking refuge in the maze of canyons and hidden valleys that characterized the area. It was their lair, a place where the unwary ventured at their peril. As darkness fell, Chaitton made camp in a sheltered alcove, his senses alert to every sound, every subtle shift in the night air. He knew that he was entering dangerous territory, and he would need all his skill and cunning to survive the confrontation that lay ahead. The whispers of the wind now carried a different message, a warning of the darkness that lurked in the shadows, a promise of the battle to come. The Apache warrior, armed with his rifle and his unwavering sense of justice, was now on the hunt for the sons of the devil. The Black Mesa loomed before Chaitton, a jagged silhouette against the pre-dawn sky. Its dark canyons and treacherous ravines offered the perfect sanctuary for outlaws like the sons of the devil. He approached cautiously, his eyes constantly scanning the terrain for any sign of their presence. He found their camp nestled in a narrow canyon, hidden from casual observation. Several horses were tethered nearby, and the faint glow of a dying fire flickered within a makeshift shelter. Chaitton dismounted, securing Ghostwalker in a concealed position, and moved forward on foot, his moccasins making no sound on the rocky ground. He observed the camp for a long time, his patience honed by years of tracking. He counted 6 men, their faces grim and hardened. He recognized the swagger of one, a hulking figure with a distinctive limp, a detail Evelyn had mentioned. Another wore a silver ring on his left hand, glinting faintly in the firelight. The pieces were falling into place. He also saw their leader, Jasper Thorne. Even in the dim light, Thorne exuded an aura of cold command. His features were sharp and angular, his eyes dark and piercing. He sat slightly apart from the others, cleaning his rifle with meticulous care, his movements precise and deliberate. There was an unsettling stillness about him, a sense of danger that radiated outwards like a palpable force. Chaitton knew he was outnumbered, but he also knew he had the element of surprise on his side. He needed to assess the situation further, to understand their plans, if any, before making his move. He concealed himself behind a cluster of boulders, listening intently to their hushed conversation. They spoke of the raid on the Thornton homestead, their voices callous and devoid of remorse. One of them, a wiry man with a nervous twitch, bragged about shooting Thomas Thornton, recounting the event with a chilling lack of emotion. Another grumbled about the meager loot they had found. Then Thorne spoke his voice, low and gravelly. The old man wasn't the target. It was the girl. A chill ran down Chaitton's spine. The girl one of the others asked, confused. There was no girl. Thornton had a daughter, Thorne explained, his gaze distant. Her name is Lily. She was away at school in Santa Fe. We were supposed to wait for her to return. The nervous man stammered. But why, what's so special about her? Thorne's eyes narrowed. That's none of your concern, Dobbs. Our orders were to bring her to Reno. Alive. Chaitton's mind raced. Evelyn had not mentioned a daughter. Could she not know, or had Thorne's men arrived before Lily's return? This new information added a dangerous twist to the situation. The attack on the homestead was not random. It was part of a larger, more sinister plan. He continued to listen, piecing together fragments of their conversation. They were expecting a rider later that day, with further instructions and supplies. They seemed confident that they had covered their tracks, unaware that a silent observer had been following them. As dawn began to break, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Chaitton knew he couldn't wait any longer. The arrival of reinforcements would only complicate matters. He needed to act, and he needed to act now. He moved silently through the shadows, his senses on high alert. He circled the camp, identifying the positions of each man, noting their weapons and their level of vigilance. He needed a plan, a way to neutralize the threat, without putting Evelyn and potentially Lily in further danger. He decided to create a diversion. He moved to the edge of the canyon and dislodged a large rock, sending it tumbling down the slope with a thunderous crash. The sound echoed through the stillness of the morning, instantly alerting the outlaws. What in tarnation was that one of them yelled, scrambling to his feet, his rifle raised. In the ensuing confusion, Chaitton made his move. As the outlaws scrambled to react to the unexpected rock slide, Chaitton moved with lightning speed and deadly precision. He emerged from the shadows, his rifle held steady, his gaze fixed on Jasper Thorne. "Sons of the devil," he announced, his voice resonating through the canyon. "Your reign of terror ends here." The outlaws spun around, their weapons raised. Thorne's eyes, however, remained cold and calculating. He didn't seem surprised, merely annoyed. "Well, well," Thorne drawled, a sardonic smile playing on his lips. "Look what the cat dragged in. An Apache brave." "You lost Redskin, I am here for justice," Chaitton replied, his voice unwavering. "For Thomas Thornton, and for the fear you have spread across this land." A volley of gunfire erupted from the outlaws. Chaitton ducked behind a boulder, the bullets chipping away at the rock around him. He returned fire, his shots precise and deadly. The nervous man, Dobbs, cried out and fell clutching his leg. The hulking man with the limp stumbled backward, a look of surprise on his face, before he collapsed. The gunfight raged within the narrow confines of the canyon, the echoes of gunfire bouncing off the rock walls. Chaitton moved fluidly, using the terrain to his advantage, picking off his targets one by one. He was a whirlwind of motion, a phantom in the shadows, his every shot finding its mark. Thorne remained cool amidst the chaos, directing his men, his own shots deliberate and accurate. He was a seasoned killer, and Chaitton knew that he was the most dangerous of them all. As the gunfight continued, Chaitton noticed one of the outlaws attempting to flank him, scrambling up the side of the canyon wall. With a swift movement, Chaitton drew his knife and hurled it with deadly accuracy. The outlaw gasped, his hands flying to his chest, before he tumbled back down, landing with a sickening thud. The odds were dwindling for the sons of the devil. Panic began to set in among the remaining members. One of them made a break for the horses, but Chaitton was faster. A single shot dropped him in his tracks. Now only Thorne and one other outlaw remained. Thorne's eyes met Chaitton's, a flicker of something akin to respect in their dark depths. "You're a formidable opponent," Apache Thorne said, his voice surprisingly calm. "But this ends now." Thorne lunged forward, his rifle raised. Chaitton met him head-on, their weapons clashing in a shower of sparks. They fought with a primal ferocity, their movements a blur of muscle and steel. Thorne was strong and ruthless, but Chaitton was faster, his movements honed by years of survival in the wilderness. Chaitton managed to disarm Thorne, sending his rifle clattering against the rocks. They grappled, their bodies straining against each other. Thorne drew a hidden knife, its blade glinting menacingly. Chaitton saw the movement just in time and twisted away the blade, grazing his arm. With a powerful shove, Chaitton sent Thorne stumbling backward. Before Thorne could recover, Chaitton drew his own knife and moved with the speed of a striking serpent. The fight was over. Jasper Thorne lay still, his reign of terror brought to an end in the dusty confines of Black Mesa. The last remaining outlaw, seeing his leader fall, threw down his weapon in surrender. Chaitton surveyed the scene, the silence that followed the gunfight, broken only by the panting of the surviving outlaw. Justice had been served, but the revelation about Lily Thornton weighed heavily on his mind. He needed to return to Evelyn to tell her what he had learned and to ensure the safety of her daughter. He instructed the surrendered outlaw to bury the dead, a grim task, under the watchful gaze of the Apache warrior. Then he mounted Ghostwalker and turned back towards the Thornton homestead, the shadow of Black Mesa receding behind him. The hunt for the sons of the devil was over, but a new and perhaps even more dangerous mission had just begun. Chaitton returned to the ravaged homestead to find Evelyn anxiously awaiting his return. Her face was etched with worry, her eyes searching his for any sign of what had transpired. "They are gone," Chaitton said simply, his voice devoid of triumph. "They will trouble no one Again. Relief washed over Evelyn's face, followed by a deep sadness. "Thank you, Chaitton. You have done what no one else could." "There is more," Chaitton said, his gaze serious. Jasper Thorne spoke of a daughter, Lily. He said they were waiting for her to return from school in Santa Fe. Evelyn's breath hitched, her eyes widening in shock. Lily. But how did they know about Lily? Tears welled in her eyes this time, not of grief, but of a new and terrifying fear. Oh God, Lily! They were ordered to bring her to a man named Reno. Chaitton continued relaying the information he had overheard. Alive. Evelyn's mind reeled. She had remarried Thomas Thornton later in life, and Lily was from his first marriage, a grown woman of 20. She had no idea why anyone would want to harm her stepdaughter. Lily was a kind and gentle soul, loved by all who knew her. "We have to get to her," Evelyn said, her voice filled with urgency. "We have to warn her. Santa Fe is a long ride." Chaitton said, his brow furrowed in thought. "And we do not know who this Reno is or what his intentions are." "I have to go," Evelyn insisted. "Lily is all the family I have left." Chaitton looked at her, his respect for her courage deepening. He saw the unwavering determination in her eyes, the fierce love for her stepdaughter that transcended fear. "I will go with you," he said, his decision firm. "We will leave at first light." Evelyn looked at him, her heart filled with gratitude. She had come to him in desperation, a stranger seeking help, and he had not only avenged her husband, but was now willing to risk his own life to protect her stepdaughter. As they prepared for the journey, gathering supplies and tending to their horses, a silent understanding grew between them. They came from different worlds, their lives shaped by vastly different experiences, yet they were bound by a shared tragedy and a common purpose. Evelyn saw in Chaitton not a savage, as the prejudiced whispers of the frontier would have her believe, but a man of honor and unwavering resolve. Chaitton in turn saw in Evelyn a woman of quiet strength and enduring spirit, a survivor in a harsh and unforgiving land. The journey to Santa Fe would be fraught with peril, but they would face it together, bound by an unspoken bond forged in the crucible of loss and the promise of hope. The desert winds carried a new whisper. Now, a whisper of resilience, of courage in the face of adversity, and of the unlikely alliance between a grieving widow and an Apache warrior united by a shared sense of justice. Their path was uncertain, but their resolve was strong. They would ride for Lily, and they would face whatever dangers lay ahead together. The journey north was a crucible, a relentless trial by sun and stone. The landscape shifted from the familiar ochre and sage of southern Arizona to the harsher, more desolate plains that stretched towards New Mexico. Days were a blur of shimmering heat waves rising from the parched earth, the sun a merciless eye in a bleached blue sky. Nights offered little reprieve, the cold seeping into their bones, the silence broken only by the mournful cry of a distant coyote, or the rustle of unseen creatures in the scrub brush. For Evelyn, the physical hardship was a grim companion to her emotional torment. Every step the horses took carried her further from the smoldering ruins of her life, yet the image of Thomas, still and silent in the dust, was seared into her memory. There were moments when despair threatened to overwhelm her, when the sheer vastness of the empty land mirrored the void in her heart. In those moments, she would look to Chaitton. He rode with an unnerving stillness, a man who seemed a part of the landscape itself. He was her anchor, his quiet competence, a bulwark against the rising tide of her fear. He taught her things she never imagined she would need to know. He showed her how to find water by following the flight of a finch, how to identify the edible roots of the yucca plant, and how to build a fire that gave off minimal smoke. He moved with an economy of motion that spoke of a life lived in harmony with this unforgiving world. One evening, as they huddled by a small, carefully concealed fire in the lee of a rocky outcropping, the silence between them felt different. It was not empty, but filled with unspoken questions. Evelyn, her hands wrapped around a tin cup of warm, bitter tea made from desert herbs, finally broke it. Did you have a family, Chaitton?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Chaitton stared into the flames, his stoic expression softening for a fleeting moment. The firelight danced across the sharp planes of his face, illuminating a profound sadness in his dark eyes. "I did," he said, his voice low and raspy, as if the words were pulled from a deep, painful place. "A wife, Narlin. A son, Tarza. The sickness came with the blue coats. It took them. It took many of our people." He fell silent, the weight of his loss hanging in the cool night air. Evelyn's heart ached for him. She had seen him as a force of nature, an avenging spirit. Now she saw the man, a man who had known a grief as deep, if not deeper, than her own. "I'm so sorry," she whispered the words, feeling utterly inadequate. He gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. "Grief is a shadow that walks with us," he said, his gaze meeting hers. "We learn to carry it. The memory of those we loved gives us the strength to do so. Thomas was a good man. Your memory of him, your love for Lily, that is your strength now." In that moment, the bond between them solidified. It was no longer just an alliance of convenience born from tragedy. It was a shared understanding, a mutual respect forged in the crucible of sorrow. They were two survivors from two different worlds, finding a common humanity under a canopy of indifferent stars. 3 days later, they found the tracks. Chaitton dismounted abruptly, kneeling to examine the ground. Evelyn watched her stomach tightening with a familiar dread. "What is it?" she asked. "Riders," he said, his voice grim. 3 of them. They passed this way less than a day ago. Their horses are shod in the same manner as those at Black Mesa." He pointed to a small, almost invisible indentation in the dirt. "And they are careless. Rushed." The realization hit Evelyn with the force of a physical blow. They were not just riding to warn Lily. They were in a race. Reno's men were ahead of them. The casual, almost leisurely pace of their journey was shattered, replaced by a desperate, frantic urgency. They pushed their horses harder, stopping only for the briefest of rests, the spectre of Reno's men, a constant shadow at their backs. The unspoken fear was a third rider between them. What if they were too late? They reached the outskirts of Santa Fe under the cloak of a moonless night. The city was a sprawling labyrinth of adobe buildings, its narrow streets a stark contrast to the open wilderness they had just crossed. The air was thick with the smells of wood smoke, livestock, and cooking food. The sounds of a distant saloon piano and boisterous laughter drifted through the air, a jarring reminder of a world that continued on, oblivious to their desperate mission. Evelyn guided them through the unfamiliar streets, her memory of a previous visit with Thomas serving as a fragile map. They avoided the main thoroughfares, sticking to the dark, silent alleyways. The school, La Academia de Santa Maria, was on the quieter eastern edge of the city, a large 2-story adobe compound surrounded by a high wall. "This is it, Evelyn," whispered her voice, trembling. Chaitton surveyed the wall, his eyes sharp and assessing. "There will be a watchman." They tethered their horses in a grove of cottonwood trees a short distance away and approached the compound on foot. As Chaitton had predicted, a lone man patrolled the perimeter, his lantern casting long dancing shadows. They watched him from the darkness timing his circuitous route. When the watchman was on the far side of the building, Chaitton moved with breathtaking speed. He scaled the wall with the agility of a panther, dropping silently into the courtyard on the other side. A moment later, the heavy wooden gate creaked open, just enough for Evelyn to slip through. The courtyard was still the only sound, the gentle rustle of leaves in a small central garden. The school building loomed before them, its windows dark and imposing. Every window was latched, every door bolted. Their hopes of an easy entry were dashed. The kitchen, Evelyn whispered, pointing to a smaller single-story structure attached to the main building. Deliveries are made in the back. The latch on the pantry window was always loose. They moved like ghosts along the side of the building. Chaitton worked on the window latch with the tip of his knife. It was old and rusted, resisting his efforts. The sound of the watchman's returning footsteps sent a jolt of panic through Evelyn. Chaitton froze, pressing them both flat against the cold adobe wall, their bodies hidden in the deepest part of the shadows. The watchman passed by, humming a tuneless melody, his lantern light sweeping just feet from where they hid. Evelyn held her breath, her heart hammering against her ribs. Once the man was gone, Chaitton returned to his task. With a final sharp twist, the latch gave way with a soft click. He lifted the window, and Evelyn scrambled through her skirts, catching on the sill. Chaitton followed, pulling the window shut behind them. They were inside. The air was thick with the smell of old grease and dried herbs. They navigated the darkened kitchen and stepped into the main hall of the school. The floorboards creaked under their weight, each sound magnified in the oppressive silence. Evelyn led the way, her hand trailing along the wall, her mind racing to remember the layout. "The dormitories are upstairs," she breathed. "Room 7. They ascended the wide, sweeping staircase, every step a calculated risk. As they reached the top landing, a door down the hall opened, spilling a rectangle of yellow light onto the floor. A stern-looking woman in a nightdress, one of the school's matrons, emerged holding a candle. They flattened themselves into an alcove, their hearts in their throats. The matron shuffled down the hall in the opposite direction, entering the washroom and closing the door behind her. They didn't wait. They hurried to room 7, the polished wood of the door cool beneath Evelyn's trembling fingers. She turned the knob, slowly praying it wouldn't be locked. It wasn't. She pushed the door open. The room was bathed in the soft, ethereal glow of a single candle burning on a nightstand. A young woman with long, dark hair lay sleeping peacefully in one of the narrow beds. A wave of profound relief washed over Evelyn, so powerful it almost buckled her knees. It was Lily. She was safe. Evelyn rushed to the bedside, her hand reaching out to touch her stepdaughter's face. "Lily," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Lily, wake up." Lily's eyes fluttered open, blinking in confusion at the sight of her stepmother. "Evelyn, what are you doing here? Is everything all right?" Before Evelyn could utter a single word of explanation, a cold, smooth voice cut through the quiet intimacy of the room, originating from the darkest corner near the door. Touching, really. A family reunion. Both women spun around. 2 men stepped out of the shadows, their pistols held steady, their faces hard and cruel. Behind them, a third figure emerged, stepping into the candlelight. He was tall and elegantly dressed in a tailored suit that seemed out of place in the rugged West. His face was handsome, but his eyes were as cold and lifeless as a snake's. It was Reno. He held a small, pearl-handled derringer, aimed not at Chaitton, but directly at Lily's heart. "Jasper Thorne sends his regards," Reno said, a cruel smile twisting his lips. He looked past Evelyn, his cold gaze settling on the Apache warrior who had now stepped forward, placing himself between the women and the gunman. "And you must be the Indian who has been such a nuisance." Thorne was right. You are a problem I am now here to solve. The silence in the small dormitory room was a physical entity, heavy and suffocating. It was broken only by the faint, almost imperceptible hiss of the candle flame. Reno's derringer remained perfectly steady, a glinting punctuation mark in the unfolding horror. His two henchmen flanked him, their own pistols held with a grim professionalism that suggested they were more than common thugs. They were predators who had finally cornered their prey. Evelyn's first instinct was to shield Lily with her own body, a primal maternal urge that overrode her own terror. Chaitton, however, didn't move. He stood as still as a mountain cat, a study in coiled potential. His eyes, dark and unreadable, were not fixed on the guns, but were in constant minute motion, cataloguing the room. He noted the distance to the single window, the heavy velvet of the curtains, the small writing desk with its glass inkwell, and the way the flickering candlelight cast long, distorted shadows that danced and writhed on the adobe walls. "So you are the man who cost me Jasper Thorne." Reno said, his voice a silken threat. His gaze flickered from Chaitton to Lily, a possessive, unsettling gleam in his eyes. "A considerable expense, but no matter. You've simply saved me a trip by delivering the prize directly to my doorstep." "Lily has done nothing to you," Evelyn said, her voice shaking but firm. "What do you want with her?" Reno let out a soft, condescending chuckle. "What do I want, oh my dear Mrs. Thornton? This isn't about what she has done. It's about what she is. It's about what she represents. It's about legacy." He took a step closer, the sweet, cloying scent of his bay rum cologne filling the small space. "Her name wasn't always Thornton, you see." He continued, his tone conversational, as if lecturing a class. "Her mother's father, a wretched old prospector named Elias Vance, stumbled upon a piece of land in the Dragoon Mountains 30 years ago. A piece of land my own father had surveyed and filed a claim for, only to have it stolen through bribery and deceit. Elias found a vein of silver, so rich, so pure, they called the claim the Serpent's Tooth. But he was a coward. He feared what such wealth would attract, so he hid the deed, registered the land under a false name, and died a pauper, taking the secret with him. The only thing he left his daughter was a worthless locket and a map cleverly hidden in a child's storybook." He gestured with his derringer toward Lily. "A book which I believe now belongs to you, my dear. The original deed to the Serpent's Tooth. My birthright. Thomas Thornton was a fool. He knew nothing of his wife's inheritance. But I am not a fool. I have spent years tracking that book, that deed. And now I will have it." The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This wasn't a random act of violence. It was a cold, calculated plan, years in the making, born of greed and a twisted sense of entitlement. Jasper Thorne and his sons of the devil were not the masterminds. They were merely the hired muscle, a brutal tool wielded by the man standing before them. "You murdered Thomas. For a piece of paper." Evelyn breathed the question, filled with a mixture of revulsion and disbelief. "Collateral damage," Reno said with a dismissive shrug. Thorne was instructed to wait for the girl and retrieve the book. His impatience proved his undoing. "And now it will prove to be yours." He turned his attention back to Chaitton. "You Apache, you have a choice. Lay down your weapons and walk out that door. Forget you ever saw us. I have no quarrel with your kind. My business is with her." Chaitton's silence was his answer. His gaze was locked on Reno, but Evelyn saw his hand hanging loose at his side, twitch almost imperceptibly. He was waiting. For what she didn't know, but her entire being screamed with the need to do something. It was then that a sound echoed from the hallway, A sharp, insistent rapping on a door further down the corridor, followed by the querulous, muffled voice of the matron. "Girls' lights out," I heard voices settle down at once. It was the barest of distractions, but it was enough. In the split second that one of the henchmen glanced reflexively toward the door, Chaitton exploded into motion. It was not a charge, but a fluid, impossibly fast act of pure instinct. He didn't reach for his gun. Instead, his right foot shot out, kicking the small nightstand with pinpoint accuracy. The stand toppled, sending the burning candle flying. It hit the heavy velvet curtains, and for a breathtaking moment, the flame seemed to die smothered by the fabric. Then, with a sudden whoosh, the dry old velvet ignited. Simultaneously with his other hand, Chaitton seized the glass inkwell from the writing desk and hurled it. It didn't fly toward Reno or his men, but at the wall beside them. The glass shattered, spattering dark ink across the adobe. In the sudden disorienting chaos of the ignited curtain and the strange, sharp sound of breaking glass, Chaitton moved. The room was plunged into a maelstrom of shadow and frantic growing light from the burning drapes. A gunshot roared, the muzzle flash, a brilliant, blinding star that seared a momentary image onto Evelyn's retinas, the terrified face of a henchman, his gun firing wildly at the space where Chaitton had been a second before. The bullet tore through the wall, sending a shower of plaster into the air. Evelyn reacted without thinking, shoving Lily to the floor behind the meager protection of a bed. She heard a choked gasp, a wet, guttural sound, and the heavy thud of a body hitting the floorboards. Another muzzle flash illuminated the scene. The second gunman was stumbling backward, his eyes wide with shock, his hands clutching at his throat, where the dark, ornate handle of Chaitton's knife was now buried. Chaitton was a phantom in the swirling smoke and dancing shadows. He moved with a brutal, silent grace that was terrifying to behold. Reno, momentarily blinded and disoriented, screamed in rage and fired his derringer. The small-caliber bullet whizzed past Chaitton's head and embedded itself in the wooden doorframe. Before Reno could fire again, Chaitton was on him. He slammed into the well-dressed man, not with a fist, but with his entire body, driving him back against the wall. The derringer clattered to the floor. Chaitton's hand wrapped around Reno's throat, his powerful forearm pressing against the man's windpipe, cutting off his air. The first gunman, recovering from his initial shock, raised his pistol again. But Chaitton, still pinning Reno, was already moving. He kicked out with his leg, his moccasin-clad foot connecting squarely with the man's wrist. Bones snapped with a sickening crunch, and the pistol flew from the man's nerveless grasp. The henchman howled in pain, clutching his shattered arm. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 10 seconds. The room was now filled with thick, acrid smoke. The fire was spreading up the curtains, licking at the dry wooden ceiling beams. Shouts and screams echoed from the hallway as the school began to awaken to the danger. Chaitton held Reno against the wall, his face a mask of cold fury in the flickering firelight. Reno, his arrogance evaporated, was now a terrified, gasping creature, his eyes bulging with fear. "Please," he choked out, his voice a pathetic rasp. "Take the mine. It's yours. Just let me live." "You speak of legacy." Chaitton hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "The only legacy you leave is this smoke and the blood you have spilled. Your life is worth less than the dust on my moccasins." For a moment, Evelyn was certain Chaitton would kill him. She saw the culmination of all the pain, all the loss, all the righteous anger tightening in his grip. But then his eyes met hers over Reno's shoulder. He saw her holding a terrified but resolute Lily, and something shifted in his expression. With a final contemptuous shove, he slammed Reno's head against the wall hard enough to render him unconscious, and let the man's limp body slide to the floor. "We have to go." Now Chaitton commanded his voice, cutting through the rising panic. He pulled his knife free from the dead man's throat, wiping the blade clean on the man's own shirt without a flicker of emotion. Evelyn grabbed Lily's hand. "The book, Lily. The storybook your grandfather gave you. Lily!" Her mind, now sharp with adrenaline, nodded numbly. She scrambled to a small wooden chest at the foot of her bed, fumbled with the latch, and pulled out a worn, leather-bound book of fairy tales. She clutched it to her chest, as if it were the most precious object in the world. Chaos had erupted in the hallway. Students in nightgowns were screaming, and the matron was shouting for water. Chaitton took the lead, heading not for the crowded hall, but for the window. He tore down the rest of the burning curtains with his bare hands, and threw them onto the floor, stomping on the flames. He smashed the window pane with the butt of his pistol and cleared the remaining shards of glass. "Out." "Evelyn, you first," he ordered. The drop to the courtyard was about 12 feet. Evelyn didn't hesitate. She swung her legs over the sill and dropped her landing, cushioned by a thick patch of grass in the garden below. Lily followed her fall, broken by Evelyn. Chaitton was last landing, with a soft thud beside them, as nimble as an animal. They fled across the courtyard, the sounds of shouting and the crackle of fire fading behind them. Chaitton unbarred the gate, and they slipped back into the quiet darkness of the Santa Fe streets, leaving the chaos of La Academia de Santa Maria behind them. They reached their horses and mounted without a word, urging the tired animals into a gallop. They rode hard, leaving the city lights behind, pushing eastward into the vast, dark wilderness that had become their only sanctuary. The cool night air did little to wash away the smell of smoke that clung to their clothes and hair. Hours later, as the first pale hint of dawn touched the eastern horizon, they finally slowed their pace. They were deep in the foothills, the city of Santa Fe, a distant memory. The adrenaline began to recede, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion and the stark reality of their situation. They were fugitives. They were guardians of a secret map that led to a fortune that had already cost Thomas his life and nearly cost them their own. Reno was alive, and men like him didn't give up. He knew who they were. He knew what they had. The whispered plea for help that had started this journey had become a desperate flight for survival. Lily looked from Evelyn's weary face to Chaitton's grim, silent profile. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice small in the immense quiet of the coming dawn. Chaitton stared ahead at the rugged peaks of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains, painted in hues of purple, and rose by the rising sun. "We do not run," he said, his voice resonating with a newfound purpose. "We go home. We go to the Dragoon Mountains. The Serpent's Tooth is yours, and we will not let them take anything else from you." The ensuing struggle in the Santa Fe boarding school was swift and decisive. Chaitton, a whirlwind of motion and lethal skill, neutralized Reno's hired guns with a speed that belied his imposing frame. Evelyn, though terrified, stood bravely by Lily's side. Reno, a man who had orchestrated violence from the shadows, found himself outmatched by the fierce protectiveness of those he sought to exploit. In the end, justice, though hard-won, prevailed. Lily was safe, and the threat posed by Reno and the remnants of the sons of the devil was extinguished. Evelyn and Lily, forever bound by the tragedy they had endured and the unexpected protection they had received, would begin to rebuild their lives, carrying with them the memory of the Apache warrior who had answered a whispered plea on the wind. The bond forged in the dust and despair of the Arizona Territory served as a testament to the enduring power of compassion and courage in the face of unimaginable hardship. Thank you for watching this tale of the Wild West. If you enjoyed this story of courage, loss, and unexpected alliances, please hit the like button. Share this video with anyone who loves a good Western drama filled with twists and real human grit. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories from the heart of the frontier. Your support helps us bring these tales to life. What did you think of Chaitton's actions? Let us know in the comments below. We always love hearing from you. Until next time, keep the spirit of the West alive.